that. I don't know where that went.
All right, I do believe we're live. How are you guys today?
Doing all right.
Good. Still under lockdown in Wisconsin, I assume.
Yes, still working from home.
Okay. Yeah, and we won't make. Dave made the joke a little bit ago. I don't even. I'm not sure if he realized the joke or not,
I
but
don't know where that
talking about COVID, and he called Phoenix a hotspot. And when you're in Wisconsin this time of year, of course, Phoenix is a hotspot.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Anyway, how are you
But
doing, Dave?
I'm doing okay. Things are busy, but they're rolling right along on all sorts of fronts. And it's actually, there's about a day and a half between winter and summer here. So it's actually changed into summer in Wisconsin, which is pleasant here.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Actually, quite nice.
When is the right time of year in Wisconsin?
Well, if you don't mind the humidity, this, from about May through September is very nice as far as the comfort outside. The as far as sky clarity, probably when it's about 10 degrees or zero during the winter time, it's reasonably good aside from the light pollution.
Okay.
And if
you
like
just identified yourself as an amateur astronomer, but okay.
That's right. And if you like football, then the only time of the state religion is only active from September through January. That's the Green Bay Packers. Yeah.
Right. Indeed.
The rest of the time, there's nothing at all going on here.
Indeed. So what's COVID doing in Wisconsin?
I don't actually know.
I think it's quieted somewhat, but and it hasn't sort of emerged as a latent hotspot that's a concern compared to some areas now that are being talked about a lot. But I tell you, I was out again on Sunday running errands and here and there, and there are vast numbers of people with who are in groups, who are in crowds, and with no mask. So I wonder what's going to happen a month from now here.
How are your protesters up in that neck of the woods as far as masks?
They have been well masked, and I actually drove along. There was a protest outside of Milwaukee, actually, in our area along Blue Mound Road, a famous shopping corridor here out near our company, and a good crowd of protesters here, and they seem to be masked up and with signs and protesting all the troubles that are going on these days that we need to rectify. So they all looked like they were in good shape.
Yeah, that's kind of. It seemed to me that most of the scenes that I saw of protesters, that it was groups were more or less masked. So I'm sure that at some point I'm sure that we will start seeing battling views of protests between this group with their masks on and then the screaming AK-47 wielding types with no masks or anything else demanding their right to a haircut. So the battling images there will be interesting.
It's a shame that it's become politicized because facts and reality don't change relative to one's political viewpoint. The virus doesn't care one way or the other. It's going to do what it's going to do. And it's funny, that they're actually now, as you sent to us, Jeff, scientific papers about the effectiveness of masks, finally.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which is quite amazing. I don't know if you want to mention that for a moment.
Oh, it's fascinating stuff going on. This thing has not been around for very long, which means that there's still a huge amount that we don't know about. But and there was a thing, I guess somebody at WHO came out and said, oh, no, this isn't airborne. And the WHO immediately had to turn around and say, disregard that, because in fact, this can be spread by aerosols and so on and so forth. But no, as we discover it, there's all sorts of evidence that wearing masks, honest to goodness, protects other people from you. It has a huge impact. The studies, both out of Berkeley and out of the Imperial College London, showing that maybe to date, something like 60 million cases have been prevented by social distancing and masks and things like that.
Right.
So it's going to be very interesting going forward, because now suddenly you look around and people aren't wearing them. And people are somehow imagining that because COVID hasn't been all the time above the fold for the last few weeks, that it's not a problem. How much, Allison, how much is it going to take? We've talked about this before.
We keep asking this question.
Asking the same question, I know.
More than what has already passed is the only answer I can give you, apparently. Because that seems to be the case every time we ask the question.
It's kind of crazy because you look at financial markets, for example, and you know what? 2 days ago, the Wall Street was through the roof because suddenly they thought that COVID wasn't going to be a thing after all. And then yesterday or today, it's down 1,800 points or something like that because the COVID numbers ticked up a little bit. And it's like, what are they? Do people not understand that this is a long-term thing, that you actually have to look at long-term trends, that you have to connect numbers of illnesses today with what you're going to see health impact a few weeks down the road?
I think people have a hard time with that, though, in general. I mean, just look at like preventative medicine. It's always an uphill battle. I think it's the same kind of thing. You can tell, again, humanity, it's just kind of like, it seems to be like the way things tend to go is that you do whatever you want and worry about tomorrow. And it's, I think that just tends to be the mindset.
But I mean, what's going to happen when triage medicine comes to someplace like Sheboygan? Yeah, how are people going to react? You guys are sitting right there in middle America. So I'm from somebody sitting there right in the middle of middle America. What's it going to feel like what are people going to do when suddenly they're facing triage medicine?
I mean, if a lot of people get sick, and I think already the hospitals are the ICU is, I heard at 86%, 87% capacity in Phoenix, big city, and Arizona is sort of exploding in number of cases. But I think this is the thing. I mean, most people, I saw them at Home Depot and elsewhere a couple days ago now. It hasn't affected me, I'm getting tired of all of this. I need to get stuff done. So the hell with it. And they don't look past a week or a few days, and they don't see things in a long-term perspective at all. But if a lot of people start getting sick in Sheboygan or Cedar Grove or, Minocqua and these little areas, all of a sudden, I think it will be a real shock to people, and they'll be forced to take this thing seriously because it's not something that's off in the ether affecting a lot of other people. And quite frankly, I don't give a damn about New York City because it's on the news all the time and I'm not there. I frankly think that's the way it is for a lot of people. And so, it may take a really bad situation where, what are we going to do? I think it's still been a very small number of people who've been tested in this country.
Well, I know they've opened testing here, but you still need a prescription. You need a doctor's order to get tested. So yes, there is testing available, but I think I was reading an article recently that was like, I want to go visit my parents or my grandparents, should I get tested? And the answer was yes, you should get tested, before you go. And it's like, but most of us still don't have that capability. We aren't able to just go get tested. It's not possible.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw the other piece of what's going on right now into the mix. The protests, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people out on the streets. Again, as we were saying, they were mostly masked. On the other hand, clearly there's going to be a lot of transmission associated with those. And yet we're talking now about dealing with issues that have been part of sort of rotting away at the core of the nation for centuries. And it's when you find yourself facing those, it's kind of hard to then turn and walk away. What are your thoughts? How do we do protests in the face of COVID and COVID in the face of this kind of change?
I mean, I think a protest is kind of like almost, so going to a protest, because there are many ways to protest. So if we're just talking going and marching as protesting, it's kind of the same as going to the grocery store. It's a calculated risk that you have to take, and some people think it's worth the risk and some people don't. That's kind of how I see it, I guess, is that, you are risking.
Yeah, but I'm gonna push back a little bit and say, we have talked about the fact that you're not taking a risk for yourself so much as you're taking a risk for lots of other people.
Mhm.
And that applies everywhere. And I mean, I'll be honest, I strongly support the protests. I am absolutely ecstatic that this is going on, and at the same time, you look at it and it's like, man, there's going to be a hell of a price to pay.
Well, yeah, like I said, I think it's a difficult decision. I mean, protests like people going out and protesting are what gets seen. Things like, and to segue into, say, the STEM protest, that is obviously effective, but it doesn't get seen in the same way. And so it is a different kind of protest, no less valid, but it is much more difficult to point at that and say, this, here are a bunch of people that are angry, I think, especially when you're trying to use that to fuel change, would be my opinion. But,
okay, so
other people have other opinions.
yeah. Tell us about, I mean, you've maybe seen consequences of the, what are they calling it? Shutdown STEM?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's shutdown STEM, yeah.
Yeah. What effects of that have you seen?
I mean, the most immediate and obvious, I guess I would say, is I normally get press releases from the American Astronomical Society and Nature and all these things every single day, and they made a commitment, yesterday, to not send out anything. So I had about 50 press releases in my inbox this morning. That was the immediate, immediate effect.
But is this something that people around the office are, hey, there's this cool thing, STEM protest going on, or?
I don't think we mentioned
is there good awareness?
Honestly, I mean, even just on the group Slack, I don't think anyone mentioned it. I mean, I know that we all got, I'm sure we all got the email, but it wasn't something we talked about.
Right. Yeah, the cultural side of that is interesting. I'm going to be obvious, or I'm going to be honest and say that it's kind of nice to see people talking about social justice around issues that are more profound than, I'm trying to think of the perfect example, the t-shirt somebody wears or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, social justice has kind of become a term that doesn't mean what it should mean.
Exactly. And it's kind of nice, for the first time in a while, I feel like I can say out loud, okay, I support social justice, not because I ever didn't support social justice, but because saying now I support social justice, people now understand it to be talking about, police brutality and about the real impacts of racism in people's lives in profound ways, and implications for what you need to do with policing and all of these sorts of things. And it's nice to have that conversation instead of having a conversation about somebody needing to have a safe space where they don't have to hear their, professor say something that they find a little bit emotionally uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, like I said, social justice has kind of become a word in common parlance that has gotten away from what it actually needs to mean. So it's nice to be able to talk about it and have it be clear what you actually mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting. Oh man, I hadn't thought about that. I sometimes think about what would make a really, really good PhD thesis at some point in the future. Somebody comparing what is going on right now with what went on at Evergreen. Am I remembering the name of the college correctly? Evergreen State, the place where they, you're both looking at me like I have funky things growing out of my head, so I will drop it there. That
doesn't mean anything.
The place where they had, they decided that, okay, what needed to happen on this day was that all of the white people were supposed to leave campus, and then the people of color would have campus. And there was one prof that said, well, actually, no, I'm teaching a class that day and my class matters. And this turned into a huge protest, a huge big deal. And this guy was just, dragged over the coals and then some. And it shut the campus down for an extended period and all of this kind of stuff. And at the time, I remember looking at that and thinking, isn't the whole point of this getting people together across those divisions? Isn't the whole point finding a way to say, how can we work together so that we actually address these things and make it better and so on and so forth? And the thing that is so very different right now is I've not seen anybody trying to approach this as as that kind of an us versus them thing. You look at the protests, and there are people of every color and every age and every walk of life out there. All of the conversations are across those. The discussion is now, okay, for people who are not Black, what does it mean to be anti-racist? What does it actually mean for you to step in and take real action around these issues? And it's just like, yeah, okay, this is what honest to goodness, productive, meaningful activism around social justice looks like. And it's kind of nice to see it. And I wonder how much of that flavor is spilling over into academia, which has sort of been the ground zero for the I need my safe space side of social justice.
I'm trying to remember. I saw something today. I cannot remember where I saw it. And unfortunately, I can't remember who said it, or I would absolutely give them credit. It was a tweet or something that someone had said. But it was something about how, I don't want this to turn into us having another seminar on how to include people. I don't want this to turn into, just another show of that, because those things aren't working. That's not what changes. And that's been a way in the past for academic institutions, kind of in particular, to get away with not doing anything more than the bare minimum. And I don't know that I'm quoting them correctly exactly, but it was kind of something like, I don't want this to be exactly what we've done in the past. We need to do something different this time.
Yeah. Let me ask the following, because it's a real problem. In fact, we were talking before, I think it was before, I forget. For people who are listening, we're talking about all of this stuff, and then at some point it comes time to say we'd better go live. And then we sit here trying to remember what you have heard and what we haven't,
right?
Or what you haven't. We were talking about the reasons why kids don't go into science, the things that kind of keep them away. And then when you look at things like underrepresentation of Blacks in science today, fixing that is extraordinarily difficult, because you're having to fix something that is at the end of it. It takes a long time to get someone from the point that says, okay, I want to go be a scientist, to the point that now it's time to, promote them into a professorship or something like that. On the other hand, the only good way quite often to get somebody to go into a field like that is to show them someone that looks like them, that is a role model that they can relate to. And so there's a little bit of a bootstrapping process that has to go on here. How do you do that?
I mean, so based on the article that I, was talking about earlier that I read, a good place to start would say be the media, because a lot of kids, their first experience with a scientist is what they see on TV or in a movie. And again, this was a particular, study that at least seemed to indicate that, most kids see men as scientists. This didn't deal with color or race or anything, but it did kind of indicate that, yeah, it seemed to be that, you know, if you conjure up the image of a scientist, you're probably going to conjure up a guy in a white jacket with goggles on who looks crazy. Basically. I mean, honestly, the article came with a picture of Dr. Emmett Brown, who I think is amazing, but is a very good example. You can't knock Doc Brown, but he is a very good example of, if you ask somebody to picture a scientist, you're probably picturing Doc Brown.
Yeah.
Ask you this: are you required to say Gadzooks occasionally too?
Great Scott. You're required to say Great Scott.
Great Scott. That's right. And anytime someone says heavy, you're supposed to ask about the status of gravity.
Many other things. But yeah, so, but I mean, again, I mean, I fully admit, you know, even if you ask me to picture a scientist, I am a woman scientist, and I still picture Doc Brown. So, you know, that's what I'm going to picture too.
Interesting. I know growing up, for me, it was a different thing. I mean, you remember this too, Dave. Cartoons, when you think about scientists when we were kids, who jumps to mind?
It's not a good look in any cartoon that you can.
Yeah, Johnny Quest.
Oh, that's before. I think Johnny Quest was before my time.
Okay, all right. Johnny Quest was not before my time. Yeah, okay. Here was Johnny Quest, whose dad was a scientist, and whose best friend was named Haji. Am I remembering that correctly?
Venture Brothers is the new Johnny Quest, so I'm just remembering this through Venture Brothers references. But
and you know, here Johnny Quest and Haji were jumping on his dad's airplane and flying all over Helen, and you know, I kind of grew up imagining that maybe being a scientist had something to do with fighting energy monsters off in the, you know, forest or something. Not really, but you get the idea.
I mean, that makes being a scientist sound like being a superhero, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. And it was, and of course, in the middle of the space race, you know, back in the days of the right stuff, and when anytime, you know, the world was just taken with that.
Failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option. And so I know what it was like when I decided to go into science. And unfortunately, you know, those times were racist times. You know, we're talking about right in there around when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And for those who have seen the movie, I just forgot the name of it, which is bad. The movie about the black women who were mathematicians.
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, yes. You know, so yeah, having grown up in the midst of that, I understand that at the time there were not an awful lot of blacks that were looking at that and saying, hey, I want to go into science, because their focus was elsewhere. But today, if you bring that forward, what does draw people into science? Who are the kinds of people that are drawn into science? What are the things that you would want to do to honestly draw a broader population, a broader demographic into science that are real, that actually do that instead of just make gestures in the direction of doing that? How do you approach that?
It would certainly be nice if we could reward scientists and teachers and other intellectuals handsomely for their effort and for their knowledge and their expertise and their leadership in, you know, the people in research science who are working on vaccines now for COVID-19 and so on, but also professors. You know, you can make a substantial amount of money as a senior professor at a major university, but that's a long road to get somewhere like that.
Well, especially when more and more there are no senior professors, because it's an awful lot cheaper to hire adjuncts.
That's an endangered species.
Who then have to live in their cars.
Yeah. So what about not only a suspicion of science, of, you know, we mentioned earlier the old bit, you know, in Young Frankenstein of, you know, well, you know, the townsfolk are suspicious of scientists. They're, you know, megalomaniacs. What they really want to do is take over the world and control it. That's not that much of an exaggeration in some people's minds about what the motives are for scientists.
And I think, if you look at media, a lot of the bad guys are evil scientists. So it's maybe why they think that. The bad guys tend to use science a lot to take over the world.
You've got a very difficult, very lengthy path for scientists to take, where they don't end up becoming necessarily as entrusted as authority figures as, say, physicians or lawyers. Mm-hmm. And God bless the friends I have who are physicians and attorneys. In a lot of cases, scientists know much, much more in terms of expertise about things than they do. No disrespect. Applied medicine being an application of scientific knowledge, but not a pure physical science PhD, for example. And a relatively sparse financial monetary reward compared to what you can do by lunging toward business, say, and being in the right place at the right time and making a hell of a lot of money, potentially, in some respects there. So it's hard and doesn't offer much real concrete reward. You have to, I think, to be a scientist, be one of these mentally defective people who likes to try to really make the world a better place, and think of what a crazy thing that is, notion that is. Huh?
Well, Joe just piped in online saying goes back at least to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and it does. That clearly we live in a world that has been completely reshaped by all of that. I know I talk to people. I have a good friend who is a pastor in the Unitarian Universalist Church. And she and I for years have had the conversation about what is science really. And the tendency on that side to look at science and conflate science with abuses of the environment and all of that kind of stuff. And that's very much, from where she is, she looks at it, and that is her honest, what she sees when she looks at it. And then, of course, I'm over here on the side where I look at it and I say, no, that's not it at all. That in fact, science is a way of knowing things. It's a way of approaching knowledge. It's a way of figuring out the difference between what is and what isn't. And that in my experience, most of the time, people that I think of as real scientists actually tend to be pretty damn progressive about, those sorts of issues.
Absolutely.
And yet the comeback is, but, then you look at Monsanto and you look at Dow and you look at so on and so forth, and all of the problems that we're talking about, or ExxonMobil or whoever, that ultimately all of that started in somebody's lab somewhere. So where do scientists fit into that mix? What responsibility does a scientist have when you look at what the scientist does and how that is used?
Well, I think you have a great responsibility to really being truly interested in what is the truth, what is reality, which, certainly not a majority of people on this planet or in this country believe is the objective through life, to really know what the truth of things is and how things really work. That's not really important at all to most people, which to me is shocking almost. And you mentioned Unitarians, by the way, Jeff, as a quick aside, my father co-founded two different Unitarian Universalist organizations. One
really, that's
in
fun.
West Lafayette when he was at Purdue, and another one in Oxford when he came to Miami University and taught there. And to him, he was a fairly, really privately, a pretty hardline scientist, so it was largely a social thing for him. In many ways, but I did want to work in the joke about Unitarians because it's a very open, belief system, and a sort of a social comforting group of people who can talk very intellectually about essentially anything. And so the old line about what you really had to be to become a Unitarian was, well, Unitarians believe in one God at most.
That's a good way of phrasing it. I like that.
I like that.
Yeah, that gets into a whole different conversation about what role those kinds of organizations play for. But I mean, which is,
I didn't mean to sidetrack it there.
Oh, no. That's
It's a hard thing though, because I like to think that there are planets out there orbiting stars elsewhere in our galaxy and throughout other lovely galaxies, where the people who really are the experts and figure out how things work and what's really going on with things that are problems and things to overcome and technology get rewarded for that.
Well, I think that's part of the problem, is that you ask about the responsibility of scientists, right? Yeah. So we're told that we have this great responsibility, but we're going to get peanuts for doing it. Which is, on some level, of course, you've got a passion for something and you want to do it, but on another level, who wants to be that? Who wants to be fighting an uphill battle their whole life? It's very difficult to get someone to want to go into something like that when they hear right off the bat, you're gonna not get anything for your efforts, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very, very difficult it's not a good selling point, let me put it that way.
Well, now you've actually talked about selection effects in two different ways there to my ear. One has to do with looking at the issue of representation of Blacks and other minorities in science and how they move through the system. But the other is in the broader sense, scientists, our job is to be the ones who actually look after what's real, in a certain sense, that our part of the social contract, at least in my mind, has to do with standing up and saying, no, do what you want with your ideologies or whatever, but that is factually wrong. And we don't do a very good job of it. And some of us not doing a very good job of it has to do with we just don't know how. A lot of us not doing a very good job of it, though, also has to do with people using I am a scientist, or I am an academic, or I am a whatever, as an excuse to imagine that they can just keep all of this stuff at arm's length. They can just stay in their office and in their lab and they do their thing, and that somehow it would sully them were they to go out and actually try to be active around a lot of these issues.
And the ivory tower complex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
which I think is maybe a little self-fulfilling, though, because again, if you go out of your lab, everybody disregards your opinion, but while you're in your lab, you are God. So it's hard to get people to want to go out, I think, in a way.
Yeah. I would take it further than that, because if you do go out of your lab, then there are an awful lot of people who are left in their labs who are going to think less highly of you on the basis of the fact that you've done that.
Well, and one extreme example of that that's closest to our hearts here with astronomy popularization, look at what people did to Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
For getting down and into the
nitty-gritty
dirt and trying to popularize science. What a turncoat, How could you do that, look at all the crap he took when Cosmos came out,
Although, no, I'm having been on the scientist talking to the press side of that a fair bit over the course of my career. That's where we met.
Yep.
I did come to realize that when a scientist says, well, you're talking to the press, you're lowering yourself, all of that kind of stuff, what they are really asking is, why is it that they were interested in what you were doing and not so much in what I was doing? And so there's a whole bunch of and why is it that they want to interview you? And well, you see, they could interview me, and I could tell them about the.
Yeah, yeah.
I was years ago. I was at someone's house, and I'm not going to put any names in here, but I was at someone's house, and this person's mother-in-law was at the table as well, and another friend of theirs who was a just brilliant astrophysicist was there. And this friend's mother-in-law, trying to make conversation, just said, well, yeah, tell me what's going on in astronomy these days. And this other guy started by saying, well, I'm sure that you know all about the integral mission. And
There's your problem. Well, I think a lot of it's not part of the science curriculum in most places to learn how to communicate with non-scientists.
right.
I think that is starting to change, which is good, because clearly that's a large part of what needs to change. I've seen very hilarious videos of, people asking grad students to like describe their thesis in normal words, and they can't do it. Which is a very basic skill that everyone should learn how to do. But yeah, I think, just because you're a scientist, I mean, again, this is true of everybody, just because you're, insert profession here, doesn't mean that you're good at explaining what you do to other people. So obviously not all scientists are the people that you want to interview, because some of them are going to be terrible at it and some of them are going to be good at it.
Right.
I think it is important, again, as a scientist, maybe it's part of that responsibility to learn how to write and speak to the public, but it's not necessarily a part of all science curricula. I mean, I know that I did actually have to take a class in it, which was like the easiest class I ever had to take. But
where were you? Where
MIT? MIT had a
MIT?
science communication class.
Really?
I don't know that I had to take it, but I did take it.
Good Lord, that's amazing.
But,
I never thought of MIT as being progressive. But
you were very progressive. Come on. No, but we did have a science communication class. But again, I think it's not a common thing. And a lot of people just go into science and think, okay, I'll never have to talk to anybody, less smart than me ever again, at least about what I do. And that's kind of a system.
A quick irony to all of that. Imagine that suppose you are admitting graduate students and you're looking at their test scores, their GREs. Not that anybody should ever look at anybody's GRE, but it is done. If you're looking at someone's GRE and you want to look at something that is actually going to be predictive of their long-term success as a scientist, what do you look at?
Question is, what do they actually look at, or what should they look at?
What should they look at? What is most predictive of your long-term success in a scientific field of the GRE?
I have no idea. I couldn't tell you.
The verbal.
Mm.
I don't even remember there being a verbal part. I blocked the GRE out of my mind. Okay, I guess that's the regular. I blocked the physics GRE out of my mind because that was terrible.
Okay, yeah.
But the regular one, okay, I guess I do remember there being a verbal part.
Yeah. But it's that if at least the last numbers like this that I saw, I keep hoping that the GRE will just go up in a puff of smoke. But the last numbers that I saw that looking at the verbal was far more predictive of someone's success as a scientist than looking at the quantitative or looking at a subject test.
Well, I think again, because part of being a scientist is learning how to learn. So even if you don't know that information or can't regurgitate it right off the bat, you will be able to figure out how to do it. It's can you communicate that with other people, whether it's other scientists or the public or your family or the press or whatever.
All right, but I'm gonna bring it back though. There's public communication of science, but I'm gonna bring it back to actual involvement in scientists in policy, to scientists actually standing up and insisting to be heard. Around
you can
these
insist to be heard all you want, but are you actually going to be heard is another matter.
Well, yeah, I hear you. On the other hand, what could be done? You look at the AAS, for example, and you guys both know the AAS. I'm a member of the AAS for years and years and years. And something would come along And the AAS's response to whatever it was would be to form a working group. And then having formed a working group, people, very often the same suspects, get together and draft some kind of a position paper.
Mm-hmm.
And having drafted a position paper, this position paper is then handed on to the press or to whoever. And maybe it makes page 12 in a few local papers. And the announcement is then, okay, we have now taken a stand. We have now done our thing. Mm-hmm. How is it that Trump can say some of the utter horseshit that he says about global warming, for example, and not the next day find 20,000 scientists standing there outside the White House saying, you don't know what the hell you're talking about? You know, how?
Because those scientists don't have the means to get there and do that. You're still looking at an underprivileged population. No, I mean, yeah, I get that. I mean, why? I guess on the other hand, if you look at, say, something like Twitter, there are scientists out there every day pointing out this was Trump's speech and this is what's wrong with it. I mean, again, maybe that's not the best way to do it. It's kind of the same thing with the, the STEM shutdown. It's virtual, it's online, it doesn't get seen the same way, but they are doing it. It's not like no one's doing anything. But maybe that's not everything that we could be doing.
Well, but okay, I'm gonna push on that a little bit, because when you look, the things that they are doing are not actually having an impact on the public consciousness. The things that they are doing are not actually getting past the gatekeepers.
Well, I think a lot of. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just they play to a limited audience because of who they are and who's following them and the methods they use. And mostly, I hate to say this, being, because it's crucially important to us and to society and the whole world and to, progress, but it's a good part of it is an echo chamber. They're bitching to each other about everything. Mm-hmm. They don't have the kind of wide audience that or any means to make it theirs that would really garner attention. At least they haven't done that yet.
Okay, now I'm gonna say though that they're a bunch of really smart people.
Yes, they are.
And I'm gonna come back to the earlier discussion about social justice and such things. And we were contrasting, okay, this bunch of academics gets together and decides that social justice has to do with making sure that there's a safe space and that you don't actually have to go to a lecture if maybe a lecturer is going to say something that you don't want to hear. And the world rightly looks at that and laughs. I'm sorry to my colleagues out there, but I look at that and the world rightly looks at that and says, if you guys are spending your time worrying about that, then you've got too much time on your hands. But then along comes what's going on right now with George Floyd. And here now is a very real social justice issue. And the whole world comes out.
Well, and this has been an issue for 401 years.
And this has been an issue
in this country even as well.
Yeah. But I look at those two things though, mm-hmm. and I think, once upon a time when we were kids, you looked at universities as a place where real impactful, meaningful social movements came from. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, a lot of that probably had to do with that was the group that was getting drafted, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. But that was a place where real, honest to goodness push for real, meaningful social change came from. And these days, that's not true of universities anymore. You look at the organizations that are really having an impact on those, and they are not organizations coming out of universities. They're certainly mm-hmm. not organizations that are being driven by academics. But there are some issues, global warming, high among them. What's going on with COVID, another one, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. where the academics must be the ones that drive that dialogue.
Well, I think what's happened is since that has kind of fallen out of favor, it's much more difficult to get traction again, would be my thought.
Okay. So how do you get
One
traction
thought, anyway.
again?
I don't know. You want me to solve the world for you? Come on.
No, hey, come on. We've only been talking for 40. We've been talking for 45 minutes, and we have left problems unsolved.
I know.
We should be ashamed of ourselves.
I mean, again, it's interesting because, I mean, again, as you know, for example, I get, you know, alumni newsletters, and you know, someplace like MIT is trying to affect a lot of change. Again, I don't know how successful they are in the broader scheme of things. You know, I get a lot of news about it, so it seems very effective to me, but maybe it's not actually. But you know, I think maybe part of it is kind of mobilizing that network of, you know, you have all these alumni and, you know, they've been there and they've been to academia, they've experienced, and ideally it's made a positive impact on their life. And maybe that's kind of where you can start getting started. I don't know if I said that clearly, but I tried.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's just it's kind of a base of people that you already have that you can kind of connect with, because again, ideally you've graduated people and they've gone on, and some of them have probably gone on to influential positions regardless of what, you know, what school it is. And maybe that's where you start. That's my solution. I don't know.
Except
Except.
what are the things, when you look at something like what's going on right now, around the issues of race, those are not the pathways that have gotten people's attention. You know, and the pathways that you're talking about have been kind of, that's how things have been done in academia, that's how things have been done in science for a long time. You know, okay, we have our alumni and we have our people with big awards, and you know, maybe it's not the AAS, maybe it's a group of Nobel Award Nobel Prize winners who get together and they're the ones that sign the document. But it's always they sign the document.
No, I mean, I think again, it kind of comes back to that thing that I read where it's like, I don't want another seminar, I don't want another committee, I don't want another documents. Maybe, you know, maybe that's kind of where we've come to, because yeah, that is very true. It's always been taking a stand, you know, by emailing everyone, by emailing all your alumni, or by issuing a press release or whatever it is. And again, that's kind of the comfortable, easy way to take a stand, but that's kind of become not enough. It's not enough.
I don't think it was ever enough.
Well, no, but it was seen as enough.
It was seen as enough. I know I have had an interesting sort of my personal ride there, having spent many years in academia and then getting out of academia. And now I actually do find myself interacting a lot with people in the professional world and business world and so on and so forth. And I will tell you, there's an awful lot of folk outside who look at academia and just kind of shake their heads and chuckle. And I will be honest and say that the longer I am outside of it, the more I kind of look back at an awful lot of that stuff and shake my head and chuckle as well. Little bit tangential here. What's the future of higher education?
I'll
let someone, Dave, you can answer that one first.
Well, in the remaining 5 minutes that we have, I think we can cover that one. It's hard to say because it's changed dramatically even since you left Arizona State University. And before then, even there has been an enormous transformation in universities compared to what a university was when I was a dumb little kid running around, hanging around my father's chemistry department, you know, in Ohio. Universities are now businesses, of course, in a literal big business sense. And a lot of people now, you know, they're online universities. There's all kinds of remote learning that one can do now. There's been for quite some time, you know, for many decades, there was a feeling that if you wanted to make anything of yourself at all, period, lock, stock, and barrel, you had to get a college degree and then some. I'm not so sure that that's the case anymore in a lot of people's thinking either, that massive investment in a degree is necessarily worthwhile in the long run, depending on what they want to do. And now we're in an insane environment, I would say, too, in some folks' minds where, I don't need to go to school at all. I want to be a professional influencer. What the hell does that mean? I'm going to get onto Twitter. I'm going to make, $250,000 a year, by tweeting and following and producing this product. There's so many bizarre approaches now from young people to do things in the world that would have been thought completely crazy 10 years ago, but now in some ways are working apparently for some people. I think it's really turned the feeling of a necessity of a full, big, impressive school, higher education a little bit on its head. What do you think about that now? Or is that an exaggeration?
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, I have thought for a while that the current business model of higher education is
not sustainable. I think
is not sustainable. I mean, if I were someone who enjoyed playing the stock market, which I'm not, if I were, I'd have a bigger office than this, and I wouldn't have spent my life in science. I would figure out a way to short higher education, and I'd put every cent that I had into doing it. And by higher education, I mean that the business model for universities as they stand.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that in 1,000 different ways. We were kind of talking about the extent to which universities have ceased to be the center for social movement that we talked about. So there's that aspect of it. There's what's going on with student debt, where
which is totally out of control,
huge indebtedness, and then getting out, and that's the one kind of debt that you can't make go away with bankruptcy, and that seems to be the one kind of debt that Republicans are, by God, I don't care anything else, but we're going to get you to pay your student loans. Universities everywhere have been playing the "if we build it, the money will come" game. And so you get universities that just completely overextend themselves trying to build all of these facilities that are supposed to bring in the money, when in fact, if the overall amount of money is going down, then if you get in up to your neck trying to get funds to build these places where the money is supposed to flow to, and if there is no money to flow there, then you're going to be in trouble. And there are a bunch of universities that are in trouble that way. You look, public universities across the nation, the idea of a public university as we knew it has all but disappeared. And in fact, there are a lot of things I don't like about Michael Crow, who's president of ASU, but one thing I think that he understood sooner than most people did is he started saying, no, we are not a public university. We are a publicly affiliated university. Understanding that the idea of, okay, this is an institution that is run by and funded by and for the good of the state, was gone. As we're learning right now, given the technology that is around, why would you want to shackle yourself to a single university anyway? And so you have to think, what is it that has to be provided by a university? And especially as universities, to save money, say we're going to go to more and more online education, which is what they're doing. Okay, that means if I'm going to get my education online anyway, why should I get it from you? Hey, if I want to take this thing, I'm going to sign up for courses at Harvard or somewhere.
The physical geography is gone as a factor potentially there.
Yeah. And so, and I think in a great many ways that is a horrible loss, because I think that the time that students and faculty actually spend in each other's presence and talking and sharing ideas and all of those kinds of things. I mean, if there's if there is anything in the world to which I would apply the term sacred, we're sort of on that turf, but that's not what universities do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, you teach a few hundred kids and maybe 3 of them show up for office hours at some point, and that maybe that's the extent of your honest to goodness interaction with them. To be honest, I think that it may be the case that in a lot of online classes, there is more good interaction between faculty and students than happens these days quite often in physical classes, just because it's so easy to send an email or Zoom.
And is that in part because, I mean, a lot of, especially broad college class, or the class sizes are so enormous now at large schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, when you look at what's happening right now, again, I was saying if I could think of a way to short universities, make a fortune doing it, because you take everything that we've just been talking about, and then you toss in there the fact that there's no such thing as going to a university and getting a degree that guarantees you a job anymore. So that's gone. There is the fact that in COVID, of course, is destroying that model just by saying you can't do it. Fiscally, spare dollars, discretionary spending is going to be hard to come by, seriously hard to come by. And that's going to have an impact on higher education. You just look at everything that's going on, and then you look at higher education as it exists today, and there's just no, they just don't fit. And higher education today is huge, of course. And when it topples, it's going to make a really big noise. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like. But anyway, what got us to that point? How did we wind up talking about that?
I don't know, but it's a good stopping point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's another area where there's a lot of change coming down the pike, and you can't resist change. Change is there for a reason. So get on the train.
Kind of been this agent of change for a lot of other places. Maybe this is another place where it's going to start a revolution of some kind.
Yeah, might be fun to find somebody who thinks about higher education in these times.
I can probably find some of those. I mean, I'm sure you guys do too, but I mean, I've got a couple of good friends that are currently professors. I haven't talked to them recently, but I'm sure they'd have lots of things to say. So.
Oh, I have lots of friends who are professors, and they say a whole. There are some of them who are aware, and there are an awful lot of them who I think still, in their minds, imagine that university higher education is what it has always
they worked so hard to get there. Why should it, they want it to be what they worked for, which would that's what I would want. So
that's another thing. That's another thing I run into, with my coaching hat on. Coaching is one of the things that I do. And if ever there were a group of people who need coaches right now, it's college faculty. Because when you look, the burnout rate, and we call it burnout. What burnout really is chronic job related stress. The burnout rate, the stress levels, the problems with mental health, the problems with all of that are now at a level in colleges comparable, college faculty comparable to what you think about as things that go on in the C-suite of major corporations, except that at least major corporations tend to acknowledge these are our real resource here. We need to do something to support them. And so corporations are realizing that. Universities, on the other hand, are saying,
You're
you know,
expendable.
no, if you can do 10% more with 10% less last year, then you can do 10% more with 10% less this year. And you can do 10% more with 10% less next year. And you should be thankful to be here. And, you know, oh, that's right, you're not doing so much now. That's just because you're deadwood. And it is an incredibly unhealthy environment. And then to fix it, they say, okay, why don't you, younger faculty member, get together with you, older faculty member, and somehow the older faculty member who's at the point in his or her career where they've completely lost it is responsible for giving guidance to this young faculty member who is living in a world that bears no relationship whatsoever to the world that the old faculty member remembers. And it's the blind leading the blind. And anyway, so yeah, we should find somebody who thinks about higher education.
I'm sure we can do that.
Anyway, well, are we?
I think we are.
You think we're done?
That's 60 minutes right there.
All right. How about that? How about that? Anybody want to toss an idea out there for discussion next week while we've got people watching to give them a, you know, dangle a hook?
No.
Nope. Oh well, we'll talk about something. I think
we will have something by next week for you.
I think the reality is that every time we've said, hey, we ought to talk about such and such, even if it's only 3 days in the future, by the time 3 days in the future arrives, things have changed so much that, yeah, anyway. All right. See you guys next week. Goodbye, everybody.
Have fun. Be safe.
Be safe. And okay, we're out.
Yay. I'm going to.
Yay.